Hello, welcome to Non-Dual Christianity. In this video I want to talk about the theology of total depravity and how it might be one of the most ironic doctrines that exists. So I'll talk about what it is and then some of the non-dual perspective of it. Total depravity is the theology or the doctrine that basically says sin has touched the entire person. So it has touched body, mind, emotion, will. There's no part of the person that isn't touched by sin. And because of that, any action that we take is always tainted by some sinful motive. So you can't do anything from a pure motive that would earn you God's favor in any way. And because of that, then, you cannot free yourself. You can't overcome this divide between humans and God. You know, there's the typical diagram where humans are over here, there's a giant valley, God's over here, you need the cross to get between the two. Well, that valley is this idea of total depravity, that it doesn't matter what you try to do, it's not earning any favor. You're spiritually dead. And because God cannot be in relationship to sin, then you also are cut off from relationship to God. There's nothing you can do to earn that. That's the traditional doctrine, as I understand it. What's interesting to me is this doctrine traditionally makes two giant assumptions. And other than those assumptions, which we'll talk about, non-duality could very much affirm what the total depravity in the verses that sort of support this, I'll put them in the description, seem to say about the human condition. The problem is we disagree about these two assumptions, and it points us in very different paths. So the first assumption is that we know who we are. First assumption is the identity of a human, of a person. And then the second assumption is that we are already separate from God, that this whole talk about sin is within the context of separation instead of in the context of unity. So if we question those two assumptions, you'll see how this leads us in very different paths. So let's explore this at one level, which I'll call the removal of guilt. And then the second level, which is the level of being or the removal of confusion. So traditional Christianity only sees this doctrine in this level of guilt removal, which can be helpful. But what it does is it assumes that this voice in your head, that some part of you that you've always thought you are, is actually who you are. And because of that, you assume you're separate. Because of that, you assume you have to do something to earn God's favor, right? And so this is natural. Whatever that is that you think you are is something created. Because it's created, it is not inherently eternal, self-sustaining, and so therefore it's anxious. Therefore, it feels like it's not enough or it has to do something to maintain itself, which is true. That ego mind that you think you are is constantly looking for ways to try to maintain itself, to be enough. For some people, this sense of not being enough manifests as guilt. And that's why the Bible is very helpful for anyone sort of stuck in that layer, because it talks about you don't have to be trapped in guilt. You can simply accept God's gift. You can simply accept grace, and it removes all of this guilt. In fact, there's nothing you could do anyway to try to make up for it. So it's meant to be comforting, and it's meant to try to help somebody who is identified with mind sort of rest and relax. There is another layer though, and that is the removal of confusion. So these same verses, if you start from the standpoint of assuming that you are not separate from the divine, because the question of salvation is not getting from here to here, but the question of salvation is simply the removal of a confusion, not a change in your being or who you are, then what you'll see is these verses are warning against thinking you are your mind, about misidentifying with the voice in your head. And that's it. Everything stems from there. Because when you misidentify as the voice in your head, then you walk down that path of not being enough, right? Of assuming you need guilt removed or that you need to attain something. But if you can be warned that the mind itself might need to be questioned, then you'll see that these verses are really saying how The mind, because it is from the dual world, can't understand your true being. It can't get to God, as in it can't understand who you truly are, because being is simply felt and experienced. It's simply in the now. Your mind can't think itself into being. So these verses, this doctrine of total depravity, is simply the warning that your mind can't get to your true essence. So don't trust it. Simply trust in that essence, which is there, has always been there, and it is what you are. Find that place. So essentially it's the warning to believe you're the voice in your head. And this is why the doctrine's ironic, because your mind takes a warning about believing the mind. It assumes it knows exactly what that's talking about, and it uses that warning, which is about how you already are the divine, don't trust this other identity, and it creates a greater separation from the divine. It says, oh, well, I'm already separate, false assumption. This is now how I can't even get to God in the first place. See, so it widens the gulf. It creates more guilt for itself. And that's why the doctrine is probably one of the most ironic, because what should be a warning against the felt sense of separation in the first place, because of your very being the divine, is used to widen the gulf. So, thank you for exploring this with me today.